After my mom died, my neighbor faked being family, broke in, and sold her jewelry for $12,000. When I confronted him, he said she wasn't going to need it. No one believed me until I found the pawn shop receipt with his ID, and I filed a police report that same day. I can still hear him saying it. Calm, almost smug, standing in my mother's kitchen like he owned the place. The same kitchen where she used to bake her Sunday pies, where she'd hum old Fleetwood Mac songs while folding laundry. Now he was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, staring at me like I was the problem. She wasn't gonna need it where she went, he repeated, when I demanded to know why her jewelry was gone. It was 3 weeks after my mom's funeral. I was still half dead myself. Hadn't eaten properly, hadn't even cleaned out her room yet. She'd left me the house in her will, small 2-bedroom in Tacoma. I'd been staying there just to feel closer to her. The neighbor, Ron, had been helpful at first. He was in his 50s, retired mechanic, lived next door for 20 years. He'd mowed her lawn sometimes, fixed her porch light once. Everyone said he was a good guy. After she passed, he offered to keep an eye on the house while I handled paperwork. I stupidly said okay. I trusted him. Then, one morning, I came home from the courthouse and noticed her jewelry box missing. Not stolen, just gone. No forced entry, no broken locks. Just gone. The only people with keys were me, my aunt in Oregon, and Ron, because Mom had given him 1 year ago for emergencies. When I asked him about it, he didn't even flinch. He just smiled that dry, bitter smile and said, she wasn't gonna need it where she went. I remember standing there, shaking. You sold it, didn't you? He shrugged. You don't have any proof. And he was right. I didn't. Not then. The cops said it was a civil matter. My aunt told me I was projecting my grief. Even my best friend told me to let it go. That it's just jewelry. But I couldn't. It wasn't about the jewelry, it was about what he did. He walked into my dead mother's home, took what wasn't his, and sold it like it was some garage sale junk. I didn't sleep for days. I kept replaying everything in my head. Every time he'd stopped by, every time I'd seen his truck parked too close to our driveway. Then one night, while going through a pile of old bills and mail Mom had stacked near the fridge, I found something tucked behind a stack of envelopes. It was a thin, crumpled piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just another receipt. But when I unfolded it, my hands started shaking. It was a pawnshop slip for $12,000. And under seller's name, in messy blue ink, was Ronald C. Mercer. And right beneath it, his driver's license number. That's when something in me snapped. Because now I finally had proof. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. Before all this, Ron was just the neighbor. The kind of guy who waves from his driveway but never really talks unless he needs to borrow a tool. He'd been around since I was a kid, long enough that my mom used to call him part of the furniture. He helped fix her gutters once, and from then on, she thought he was some kind of neighborhood saint. When Mom got sick, Ron started stopping by more. At first it felt nice. He'd bring soup, mow the lawn, shovel snow when I couldn't make it over. But looking back, there were moments that should have made me uneasy, like how he always lingered when she took her meds, or how he'd ask way too many questions about her finances. Mom trusted him completely. She'd leave her front door unlocked for him, even when I told her not to. She said, "Honey, Ron's harmless. He's just lonely." She was wrong. When she died, sudden stroke, middle of the night, I handled everything. The funeral, the insurance, her estate. Ron came to the service, sat right in the front row, acting like family. People even whispered that it was sweet how much he cared. But a few days later, things started to feel off. The first time I came back to the house alone, I noticed little changes. Her bedroom window was cracked open even though I'd shut it. The light in the hallway, burnt out the day before, was working again. And the smell of cigarette smoke hung faintly in the air. Ron smoked, but my mom hadn't let anyone light up inside since my dad died. I brushed it off. I was too tired to care. Then he started showing up unannounced. Always with some excuse, just checking the mail, making sure the pipes don't freeze. Your mom would have wanted someone keeping watch. One afternoon, I found him in her backyard shed. He claimed he was looking for fertilizer. Later I realized that's where she kept the safe. The jewelry that went missing? It wasn't just random stuff. It was her life's worth. Gifts from my dad, heirlooms from my grandmother. Rings, necklaces, gold bracelets. Some of it was insured, most wasn't. She used to polish each piece once a month, sitting on the couch watching old reruns, humming quietly. That's what made it personal. When I confronted him that first time and he said those words, she wasn't going to need it where she went, I swear something inside me froze solid. I couldn't believe how easily he said it. Like it was funny. I called the cops. They took notes, asked a few questions, and told me unless I had proof, there wasn't much they could do. They even asked if maybe my mom gave him something before she passed. I almost threw up. No one believed me. My aunt said grief makes people paranoid. My cousin told me to sell the house and move on. But I couldn't. I knew what he did. I could feel it in my gut. So when I found that pawnshop receipt, I finally saw it for what it was, not just theft but betrayal. He used her death to help himself. And as I held that crumpled paper in my hands, one thought hit me harder than anything else. If he was willing to do that for money, what else had he done while my mom was still alive? That question wouldn't leave my head. And finding the answer would end up being worse than I ever imagined. The morning after I found that receipt, I drove straight to the pawnshop listed on it, Tacoma Gold and Loan. It was one of those places wedged between a vape store and a payday loan office. Inside smelled like stale carpet and metal polish. The guy behind the counter looked like he'd seen every kind of scam imaginable. When I slid the receipt over, his eyes flicked up at me. You related to Ron Mercer? I froze. He's my neighbor. Why? He sighed and rubbed his temple. Look, lady, he sold a lot of stuff here a few weeks back. Real nice pieces. Said his sister had passed and he was handling her estate. My stomach twisted. His sister. He nodded. Yeah. Said her name was Helen Mercer. Helen was my mother's name. That's when I knew. Ron hadn't just stolen her jewelry. He'd pretended to be family to get away with it. I asked if the items were still there. Most weren't. They'd already been melted down or resold. But the owner kept copies of IDs for all transactions, and he still had Ron's on file. He couldn't legally hand it to me, but he let me look at it, off the record. There it was. Ron's driver's license photo, his shaky signature, and the words relationship to deceased. Brother. I left the pawnshop shaking, half with anger, half with adrenaline. I called the police again, armed with everything I had. This time they actually opened a case. But when they questioned Ron, he denied everything. Said I forged the receipt. Said I was trying to frame him out of grief and confusion. And somehow people believed him again. That's when I started noticing the small things he was doing to mess with me. My trash bins knocked over. My tires mysteriously deflating overnight. Once, I came home and found the side gate open, even though I'd padlocked it that morning. It wasn't loud harassment. It was quiet, invasive, like he wanted to make me doubt my own sanity. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the motion light turning on in the backyard. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw a figure standing by the fence, too tall to be random. I couldn't see his face, but I knew. I just knew. I called the cops, but by the time they came, he was gone. They found boot prints in the mud leading back toward his property. The officer just said, could be coincidence. Coincidence. I started documenting everything, photos, timestamps, notes. I printed the pawnshop receipt and sealed it in an envelope, hid it behind a loose board in Mom's old closet. I wasn't going to let him erase what he did. Then one afternoon, I came home to find something new taped to my door. A single envelope with my name written in shaky block letters. Inside was a folded photo. My mom, standing in her garden, smiling. But across the photo, in thick red marker, someone had written, "She gave me everything." That was the moment I stopped being scared and started being strategic. Because now it wasn't just about proving he stole from her. It was about finding out what else he'd done, and why my mother had started avoiding his calls in those final weeks before she died. I couldn't shake that photo. I stared at it for hours trying to make sense of it. She gave me everything. What the hell did that even mean? I thought maybe it was just a sick taunt. But something about it felt deliberate, like he wanted me to look closer. So I did. I noticed the background first. The photo wasn't one I'd ever seen before. It wasn't from any of Mom's albums. The angle was different, too. It looked like it had been taken from behind the fence. From his yard. That meant he'd been taking pictures of her. I started digging through Mom's old phone, her cloud backups, her messages, anything I could find. That's when I found a thread labeled simply R. I'd assumed it was me at first, but it wasn't. It was Ron. The messages started out friendly enough. Updates about the lawn, reminders about doctor appointments. But then, halfway through, things got weird. He'd text her things like, "Don't ignore me like last time," or, "I told you not to talk to him about it." The last message was sent 2 weeks before she died. It said, "If you don't keep your promise, I'll tell her everything." I read it a dozen times, my stomach dropping lower each time. He was talking about me. What did my mom promise him? What did he think she'd told me? The next morning, I took everything, the photo, the texts, the pawnshop receipt, and went to the detective handling the case. She listened, took notes, and said she'd look into it. But she also said something that stuck with me. If your mother and this man had some kind of arrangement, proving theft might get messy. Arrangement. That word made my skin crawl. That night, I walked next door. I didn't plan it, I just snapped. He opened the door half asleep, wearing that same smug expression, like he'd been expecting me. "You think you're smarter than me, huh?" I said. Selling her jewelry, taking pictures, threatening her? His eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. He actually smiled. "Your mother and I had an understanding," he said. "She wasn't as innocent as you think." I stepped closer. "You're lying." He shrugged. "Then why did she keep coming over here at night? Why did she sign the papers?" "What papers?" He grinned. "Oh, you didn't know about that?" He disappeared into the house for a second and came back with a folder. Inside were photocopies of some kind of handwritten agreement, dated just a month before she died. It said that she was gifting several items to him, including the jewelry, in appreciation for his years of help. The signature at the bottom looked like hers. But I knew it wasn't. I knew her handwriting like my own heartbeat. I looked up at him and said, "You forged this." He just leaned in close enough that I could smell his cigarette breath. "Then prove it." I left shaking, furious. But when I got home and looked at her old files again, I found something buried deep in her desk drawer. An envelope labeled, R. Do not open. Inside was a short handwritten note in her shaky writing. "If anything happens to me, tell the police to look at Ron. He's not who you think he is." That was the moment everything changed. Because my mom knew. She knew something was wrong. And now I had proof that this wasn't just theft or harassment. It was something darker. Something she'd been afraid to tell me before she died. After finding that note, I stopped sleeping entirely. Every sound outside the window made me jolt awake. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. But under the fear, something colder had started to grow. A plan. Mom had warned me, even if she didn't know how deep it went. I was done waiting for cops who didn't care or neighbors who thought I was crazy. If Ron wanted to play games, I'd make sure he lost the last one. First thing I did was make copies of everything. The note, the pawnshop receipt, the texts, the fake agreement, even the creepy photo he left on my door. I scanned them all, backed them up on multiple flash drives, and hid one set in a locker at the bus station downtown. Another went to my friend Jess, who finally started believing me after I showed her the do not open note. Next, I called the pawnshop owner again. I asked if he'd be willing to testify if it came to that. He hesitated, then admitted Ron had been acting off during the sale. Said he'd bragged about how family ties make transactions easier. That little detail would matter later. But the part that got me thinking was the date. Ron had sold the jewelry 3 days before my mom died. That made everything different. It meant the jewelry wasn't something he took after she passed. It was taken while she was still alive. Maybe even while she was in the hospital. and the cops hadn't even looked at that timeline. That's when I decided to dig deeper into her medical records. I called the hospital, pretending to be following up on insurance claims. The nurse on the line told me something that nearly made me drop the phone. Ron had listed himself as her emergency contact. Not me. Not her sister. Him. That's how he'd gotten access to everything. Her room, her files, her belongings. He'd used that brother lie long before the pawn shop ever saw his face. So I started mapping it all out. Every date, every lie, every weird thing that didn't make sense. He became her emergency contact on March 10th. The jewelry sold on March 21st. Mom died on March 24th. I found out about it on April 14th. 3 days. That's all that separated her death from his payday. And I started wondering, had she known he took it? Did she confront him? Was that why she wrote that note? My revenge plan wasn't about violence. It was about exposure. About making sure everyone saw what he really was. So I started small. I posted on the local neighborhood Facebook page, asking if anyone had dealt with Ron Mercer recently. Within hours, 2 people messaged me privately. One said he'd helped her elderly mother with home repairs and never returned her tools. Another said her dad hired him to fix a car and caught him trying to steal cash from his glove box. He had a pattern. That gave me the leverage I needed. I contacted a lawyer friend of Jess's and showed him everything. He said the fake gift document was laughably bad and that I could take it straight to probate court to contest. He even mentioned something about elder exploitation laws that could open up criminal charges. But before we could file anything, something happened that made my stomach drop. I came home from work one night and my mom's old lockbox, the one where she kept her will, was sitting open on the coffee table. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. Inside, everything was still there, except for the note. The one that said, "If anything happens to me, tell the police to look at Ron." Gone. That's when I realized Ron had been inside again. And he wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. He was trying to erase the last proof my mom ever left behind. So I decided if he wanted to come back, I'd be ready for him. And when he did, I'd make sure every single person in Tacoma saw exactly who he really was. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Jess, not the lawyer, not even the cops. I needed Ron to think I was backing off, that I was scared. So I left the lights off for a few nights, parked my car a block away, and waited inside my mom's house with my phone camera pointed at the front door. It didn't take long. On the 3rd night, around 1:40 a.m., the doorknob turned. Slow, careful. The old metal clicked the same way it used to when Mom came home from her night shifts. My chest tightened. Then I saw him, Ron, creeping into the hallway with a flashlight, gloves, and a small duffel bag. He went straight to her bedroom. He didn't even hesitate. I hit record. Every second. I followed quietly, keeping distance. He opened the closet, crouched down, and started feeling along the baseboards. Then he pried one loose. My heart nearly stopped. That was the spot where I'd hidden the envelope with the pawnshop receipt weeks earlier. He pulled out a small envelope, my backup copy, and smirked like he'd found buried treasure. That's when I whispered, "Looking for something?" He spun around, flashlight hitting my face. For a second, he looked startled. Then his expression went flat. "You shouldn't be here. This is my house," I said. "And you just broke in. Again." He dropped the envelope and stepped toward me. "You don't understand, kid. Your mom. She wasn't who you think she was." I held my phone up, still recording. "I understand perfectly. You forged her signature, stole her jewelry, and lied to the cops." He let out this low laugh, almost pitying. "You think that's what this is about? You think I cared about that jewelry?" I froze. "Then what was it about?" He tilted his head. "Ask yourself why she never told you who I really was." "What?" "She lied to you your whole life," he said. "Because if she told you the truth, you'd have hated her as much as she hated herself." I wanted to tell him to shut up, but something in his voice made my stomach turn. "She didn't tell you about your father, did she?" he said. "Didn't tell you that he wasn't some deadbeat who skipped town. Didn't tell you he was me." I just stared at him. My brain couldn't even process it at first. Then he said it again, slower. "I'm your father, kid." I actually laughed. Just this broken, hysterical laugh. "You're insane." But then he pulled something out of his pocket. A folded paper yellowed at the edges. A birth certificate. My name. My mother's name. And under father, the name Ronald Mercer. My hands went numb. He said, "She begged me not to tell you. She didn't want you to know she got pregnant at 17. She thought I'd ruin her life. So she disappeared, changed her last name, raised you alone. And when she got sick, she came back here, right next door to me. Fate's funny. Huh." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. He smiled like he'd won. The jewelry? The note? That was her guilt. She promised to give me something back before she died. I didn't take it. I collected what I was owed. I said, "You're lying. You're lying, and I'm recording everything." He shrugged. "Then show them. They won't believe you. They never do." But what he didn't realize was, he'd already given me exactly what I needed. His voice, his face, his confession. Every word on video. When I finally kicked him out and locked the door, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, phone in hand, realizing the truth my mom had died trying to hide. The man who'd robbed her wasn't just her neighbor. He was the man who'd destroyed her life decades ago. And now he was trying to finish the job with me. After that night, I didn't go back next door. I couldn't even look at his house. The thought of sharing DNA with him made my skin crawl. But the part that haunted me most wasn't the "I'm your father" part. It was the way he said it, like he was proud of it. Like all of this had been some long, sick plan finally coming full circle. I sent the video to the detective the next morning. She told me not to contact him again and said they'd review it carefully. But I could tell from her tone. She didn't know what to do with this. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was something more twisted, more personal. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying everything my mom ever told me about my dad. She'd said he wasn't in the picture, that he left when I was a baby. She never mentioned abuse, or coercion, or fear. But looking back, all the small things made sense now. Why she changed our last name, why she moved states, why she used to double-check the locks even in broad daylight. When Jess came over, she said, "You need to understand what kind of man does something like this." So I started digging. I looked up court records, old newspaper archives, anything with Ronald C. Mercer. And that's when I found it. In 1995, he'd been arrested for inappropriate conduct with a minor. Charges dropped. No conviction. Just a sealed record. But the victim's initials matched my mother's maiden name. That was the moment I stopped feeling confused and started feeling sick. He hadn't dated my mother. He'd preyed on her. She was 17. He was 33. She ran away, changed her name, and somehow, by some cruel twist, ended up buying a house next door to him decades later without realizing it was the same man. He knew exactly who she was the day she moved in. He recognized her. And he played the long game, friendly neighbor, helpful handyman, until he could get close again. That's why she wrote that note. That's why she changed her locks twice that last month. And when she finally realized who he really was, she panicked. She didn't die by accident. She'd had a stroke. But now I wasn't so sure. The doctor said she was fine 2 days before she collapsed. There'd been no warning, no symptoms. I started wondering, could he have done something to her? Could he have given her something, or tampered with her meds? He had access to her house. He was listed as her emergency contact. He could have easily slipped something in. I brought all of this to the detective, shaking, and she looked like she didn't know whether to comfort me or throw up herself. She said they'd reopen the case as a suspicious death. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Ron was smart. He'd hidden behind fake kindness for decades. He'd gotten away with it once. He knew how to manipulate systems, people, even grief. The jewelry, the photos, the fake agreement. None of that was about money. It was all about control. About reminding me that even after all these years, he still decided what we lost. He wanted to own my mother's memory, and then he wanted to own my fear. That was the kind of monster he was, one who didn't just steal things, but rewrote entire lives so he could feel powerful. So yeah, I knew the cops would take their time. They always do. That's why I decided I'd handle the ending myself. Not violently, not illegally, but in a way that would take away the one thing he couldn't stand to lose, his reputation. I was going to burn down the good neighbor mask he'd built over 30 years, piece by piece, and in public. He wanted everyone to think he was untouchable. He was about to find out what it feels like when the whole town finally sees you for what you are. I knew I couldn't walk into the police station and expect the world to change because I was angry. I needed something they couldn't shrug off. Receipts, witnesses, his voice admitting everything on camera. I had those. What I didn't have was anyone who would look at him and not see the friendly neighbor who shoveled your driveway. So I aimed for the one thing he'd built his life on, his image. First move. I walked into the Tacoma weekly paper. I didn't beg or plead. I sat down with the reporter whose byline popped up on every local corruption story and dropped the folder on his desk. Pawnshop receipt with Ron's ID. The duffel bag video with him confessing he was my father and admitting to the theft. Copies of the texts. The do not open note in Mom's handwriting. I told him what the cops wouldn't at first, that my mother had warned me about Ron. He didn't run. He called his editor. They came to my house that afternoon and recorded my story with the same shaky honesty I felt. The paper verified what they could quickly. The pawnshop matched dates, the shop owner corroborated Ron claiming the deceased as his sister, and the hospital confirmed he'd been listed as emergency contact. The reporter asked tough questions and took photos. He promised to run it. The day the article hit, it hit hard. It was front page. Neighbor, ex-mechanic accused of preying on local woman, selling her heirlooms. They printed stills from my phone. Ron's face on the night he rifled through Mom's closet. The receipt with his driver's license number. The headline. The comments section erupted. Neighbors I'd only waved at messaged me, then showed up at my door with stories. Tools borrowed and never returned. Checks cashed without receipts. Little things that fit the pattern. A woman I'd never met said Ron had tried to get her mother to gift him jewelry years ago. Another neighbor produced pictures of him lurking near windows. The morning after the story ran, the detective called. Suddenly, the civil matter got eyes on it. The county prosecutor reached out. The pawnshop owner agreed to testify. My lawyer friend filed for a temporary restraining order and for a probate hearing to contest any gifts Ron claimed. The DA opened an investigation into elder exploitation and theft. Ron's mask came off everywhere. The church ladies who baked him cookies stopped after they read the article. His name showed up in text chains across Tacoma. People comparing notes. He stopped coming to the yard sales and block barbecues. He started answering his door with a different, brittle smile. The same neighbors who had once called him part of the furniture called the cops when he showed up at their house asking about old friendships. And then the prosecutor did something I hadn't expected. Based on the timeline and the new evidence, they secured an arrest warrant for grand theft and elder abuse and served it to him in the driveway while a small group of neighbors watched. They also announced they were reviewing the circumstances around my mother's death as part of the investigation. The courtroom was quieter than I thought it would be. There was no dramatic showdown, just the slow bureaucracy of justice. But watching Ron sit there handcuffed, trying to find a friendly eye in a room where everyone now avoided his gaze, felt like a slow, cold victory. The probate judge invalidated the gift documents as forgeries. The pawnshop receipt became Exhibit A. He pled to some charges. I watched the DA paint the picture I had been shouting into the void for months. It wasn't everything I wanted. No jail time fixed what he'd taken from my mother's last years. But it severed his access. It took away the lies he had been living behind. It made him, for once, look small and exposed. After the hearings, I sat in Mom's kitchen with her teacup, still a little ring of lipstick on the rim, and let it all feel heavy and real. People brought casseroles. One of Ron's old fans left a bouquet with a note that said, "I'm sorry I didn't see." That stung worse than anything. I filed the rest of the paperwork, sold a couple of the recovered pieces to cover legal bills, and closed out the estate the right way. I kept one thing. A simple gold locket my dad, real dad, not Ron, had given her before he left. I wear it when things get loud in my head. Revenge wasn't a dramatic flame. It was paperwork, witnesses, and a lot of neighbors finally choosing to believe what my mother had known all along. It was public humiliation and legal consequence wrapped together. It wasn't pretty. It was necessary. The last time I walked past Ron's empty house, someone down the block waved at me. I waved back, and for the first time since Mom died, I felt this small, fierce weight lift. He tried to convince me that grief made me weak, that people wouldn't believe a kid. The town did believe me. The law did too. My mother used to say that people can hide in plain sight if you don't want to see them. She was right. I don't look away anymore. And as for Ron, he once told me, sneering, she wasn't going to need it where she went. I like to think he didn't expect the one thing you can't pawn: the truth.